silence filled the room for a moment before Juvilien told Max that Geraldine was her night guard. Most people already knew Geraldine's face because he always accompanied Juvilien whenever she went out. Juvilien already had a plan in mind. She would convince her father to accept her decision to have Geraldine accompany her to the banquet, as he would also protect her from the slanderers and no romantic rumors would fly around since they were cousins. For a second, Max was relieved by Juvilien's decision, which made him curious about why he was relieved when it didn't have anything to do with him. Max's heart skipped a beat after Juvilien thanked him for just listening to her problems. Feeling strange for some reason, Max stood up and immediately left the room. Before leaving, Juvilien gave Max a pouch, curious about what was inside. Max opened it as instructed and was confused to see money inside. Speechless, Juvilien told Max that he could visit her place whenever he wanted if he had nowhere else to go. Max's face turned red and he just nodded in response. As the sun was about to set, another potential partner for Juvilien was about to visit the Floyan estate when they were abruptly stopped. To his surprise, it was Duke Regis who asked if his identity was Ronald Herman Krokos. The Duke didn't want Ronald visiting his home and suggested they would have the conversation outside instead. Ronald asked the Duke why he was not qualified to be his daughter's partner, to the point that he would warn him to never approach her. Undeterred, Ronald refused to back down from the Duke's threats because he wanted to hear the rejection from Juvilien herself. A few minutes ago, the Duke had also threatened another potential candidate named Boromir, and with just one sentence, Boromir had backed off. Feeling confident, Ronald knew that he was Juvilien's last option. Upon hearing his daughter's words being spoken so casually, Duke Regis was furious. With one mistake from Ronald, he triggered the Duke's anger and Ronald immediately left the area to avoid certain death from the Duke himself. After calming down, Duke Regis planned to have Derek write up a new list for him because he did not like any of the candidates that had been presented. Later that night, Juvilien already had her plan and had also found out that the rumors came from Droyle since he was the only one who had seen the cufflinks that Juvilien intended to give to her father. For the time being, Juvilien planned to observe her father's mood in order to properly give the cufflinks to him. When the Duke asked why Juvilien was looking for him, the Duke somehow felt indifferent when his pendant was returned. However, when Juvilien handed her gift to the Duke, he was silent for a moment, which made Juvilien think if her plan would really work. When Juvilien was about to inform her father of her partner, the Duke misunderstood the present and told Juvilien that he would gladly go with her to the banquet. The Duke's response left Juvilien in total shock. During the night, one of Max's guards was curious about what was on his mind. Max was annoyed because he couldn't stop thinking about Juvilien. When asked by his guard if something was wrong, Max told the guard not to pry into his business and to report immediately. There was nothing new to report, other than that Max's temporary replacement, Victor, was now being suspected of not being the prince under the helmet. After being instructed by Max to tell Victor not to show any weaknesses, the guard felt sorry for Victor because he had to wear the armor in very warm weather. The guard then mentioned that Juvilien would most likely be the topic of gossip at the banquet since she was attending. When the guard wanted to tell more information about Juvilien, Max stopped her and instructed her not to go into such details. When the guard mentioned that she would be taking her leave to inform Victor, Max told the guard that she could not leave yet because he would be assigning her a very important task and she must report back at the weekend. The day of Duke Arello's banquet had come, and all the noble ladies had gathered to socialize at the event. The task that Max had given to his guard, Freya, was to help Juvilien and protect her from the slanders of the noble ladies. The ladies mentioned that the roses were really the reason why they wanted to attend, but Freya knew that they were just waiting for Juvilien and her partner to arrive. When rumors surrounding Juvilien having an illegitimate child started spreading, Freya immediately toned them down and told the ladies that Juvilien had recently broken up with Mikhail, and was most likely choosing a much safer way to avoid any more rumors about her. Since Juvilien's love stories were like a maze, Freya stated that they would just have to find out who the owner of the cufflinks Juvilien had bought was. After Freya successfully protected Juvilien's name, the noble ladies changed their topic to Mikhail. They were about to see Mikhail and Juvilien again at the banquet and were curious to see what might happen. The ladies then immediately came up with the rumor that Mikhail might be the owner of the cufflinks, which drained Freya and made her unsure if she could stop the rumors from growing. Meanwhile, Mikhail looked unstable and was waiting for Juvilien to arrive, curious to see who she was bringing with her. Duke Regis and Juvilien were on their way to the banquet when the Duke mentioned that Juvilien didn't have to worry about the people slandering her because he would protect her. From it, arriving at the party, the Duke offered his hand to Juvilien as they got out of the carriage. Everyone was surprised to see Duke Regis at the banquet. Questions spread about whether the Duke was Juvelian's partner. Everyone was then silenced as Duke Regis and Juvelian were introduced and entered the banquet. Juvelian remembered her past life, when she was just a side character who craved for love, but was abandoned by the love of her life and rejected by her own father, and thus died pathetically. In her second life, she decides to run away and change her life back to reality. When Juvelian heard the Duke say that he would protect her and that she didn't need to worry because he would be by her side, she was very curious about what was on her father's mind. The nobles were in awe and could not speak in the presence of Duke Regis and Juvelian. Some nobles still could not resist gossiping, saying that Juvelian's act of giving another pair of cufflinks to the Duke was to avoid more rumors. When the Duke heard the gossip, he immediately gave a glare that would make any man or woman tremble in fear. Everyone at the banquet was surprised that Juvelian revealed the store where she bought the item. Rose Marie was so impressed with Juvelian that she revered her as an angel. While the banquet was brimming with lively music, Juvelian was finally able to relax when she found a private space for herself. She was suffocating due to the crowded place and the constant questions from people. Hiding from the branches, Max witnessed Juvelian crying, which made him curious about the reason for her tears. Max was also at the party, observing the banquet and how the task he had assigned to Frisia was turning out. However, Max didn't expect to see Juvelian outside, crying. What no one knew was that Juvelian cries when she yawns, and she also wanted to go home already. Juvelian was surprised to see Max at the banquet, asking her why she was crying. Juvelian was still curious about why Max was at the banquet, but when she was about to ask him, he cut her off and told her that even though he didn't know what happened, he asked her not to cry and asked if someone had bothered her. When Max asked for the identities of the people who had offended Juvelian, she became confused and didn't know what Max was saying. When Juvelian asked if Max would teach her offenders a lesson, he responded that he would. Juvelian knew that with his actions alone, he could be executed, as even speaking informally to someone could be seen as a form of mutiny. Juvelian had grown quite attached to Max and didn't want him to die. If Max wanted to help Juvelian, then she recommended that he fix his informal speech and use honorifics, especially in front of others. When Max asked why he would do such a thing, Juvelian explained that words can make enemies or allies, depending on how one uses them. Nobles are sensitive to words. Maybe if their status system were abolished, no one would need to worry about it. However, since that is not the case, they should be very careful about how they speak. Juvelian was able to persuade Max with her reasoning and made him agree to fix his informal speech. When Juvelian asked the reason why Max was at the banquet, he only responded that it was work-related, but in reality, it was to check up on Juvelian. When Max asked why Juvelian was outside and not with her partner, he was surprised to know that Juvelian's partner was her very own father. Max knew of her plan and thought that she would be partnered up with her cousin, but due to the Duke's unreadable moves, he ended up becoming her partner. Because of her father as well, Juvelian didn't receive a single dance request. Juvelian was surprised to see Max extending his hand, offering to dance with her while the music was still playing. When Juvelian asked if he could even dance, Max responded that she should be honored because Max doesn't just dance with anyone. Juvelian's face turned red from seeing Max's face up close. Thinking that she would probably lead the dance, Juvelian was surprised that Max knew how to dance. When Juvelian slipped, Max immediately caught her and asked why she was so distracted. When their faces were now close to one another, the Duke witnessed what happened and warned Max to get away from his daughter. Initially, the Duke was planning to spend a peaceful day with his daughter. He saw Juvelian going outside and thought that she would be fine. Mikhail saw Juvelian going outside and thought that it was a sign for him to follow her. Mikhail was surprised by the Duke's sudden change of attitude. After reading Mikhail's letter, Duke Regis made it his mission to never let Mikhail get near his daughter again. The Duke intentionally let Mikhail go so that Juvelian would enjoy the banquet, and he didn't want to ruin it for her. Suddenly, he saw Juvelian's silhouette dancing with someone. The Duke was impressed and thought that the man Juvelian was dancing with might be a great guy since he was able to avoid the Duke's attention. The Duke wanted to let them finish their dance and investigate the man later, but when he heard an alarming sound coming from Juvelian, he thought of the worst and sprinted towards her location. When the Duke saw a man clenching Juvelian's hand, he immediately gave a warning to let his daughter go. Remembering when the Empress asked him to teach Max how to live, Duke Regis accepted Max as his disciple. But now, upon seeing what they were doing, Duke Regis asked if Max had any romantic interests in Juvelian. Seeing that his father was bleeding, Juvelian asked if he was all right, which made the Duke a bit happy to see his daughter's concerned face. On the other hand, Juvelian was curious why the Duke was outside. having trouble how to stop the bleeding and while still feeling the effects of the wine. The Duke told Juvelian that he would ask the details later, and that they should leave first. Juvelian was relieved to see his father's expression a little relieved. When Max asked Juvelian about her feet, as it looked like she may have been hurt, the Duke immediately stopped Max with his worries since he would now take care of his daughter. Juvelian supposedly knew the ending of her story, but she was surprised to witness that she was now being carried by the man who rejected her in her previous life. Before leaving, the Duke told Max that he didn't need to visit his place anymore, as he would personally visit him. Juvelian was now very embarrassed since her father was now carrying her across the crowd of nobles. When Juvelian told her father that it was now okay to put her down, the Duke refused since Juvelian hurt her feet. The Duke misunderstood the reason why Juvelian wanted to be put down. It was not because her injuries were now okay, but rather because she was embarrassed to be carried by her father in front of the other nobles. Juvelian wished she could just vanish to escape their prying eyes. As the Duke carried Juvelian out of the party, people began to gossip about her. The noble ladies started talking behind Juvelian's back, accusing her of deliberately causing a scene to draw attention away from Rose Marie, the birthday celebrant. Rose Marie defended Juvelian against the gossip, reminding everyone that Juvelian had been sick recently, and it was possible that she had not fully recovered. Rose Marie was even more impressed that Juvelian had attended her party even though she was sick. She commended Juvelian for her strength and courage. With Rose Marie's help, the negative gossip turned into concern for Juvelian's health. Mikhail, who was still at the banquet, secretly listened to the gossip of the noble ladies. He heard that Juvelian had always been weak and remembered that she might not have been faking her illness after all. He recalled the days when Juvelian could barely keep up with him on their walks because she got tired so easily. He now felt remorse for ignoring her all those times. At the Floyan mansion, Juvelian was reminded by her father of the doctor's orders to stay indoors for a few days. Juvelian was curious about why her father was suddenly so caring towards her when he had always ignored her before. She then realized that he was only being nice to her now because it would benefit him in the long run. The Duke knew that Juvelian was now being considered as a potential bride for the crown prince. The marriage could only go ahead if Juvelian was healthy, so the Duke was making sure that she took care of herself. Juvelian had thought that breaking up with Mikhail would free her from the death flags that seemed to follow her around. However, she now realized that her father was planning to replace Mikhail with the crown prince. Juvelian was scared and didn't want to have another tragic ending. Meanwhile, at Salon Bloom's, Max couldn't stop thinking about Juvelian. He blushed when he imagined what would have happened if he had kissed her when he caught her falling. Freya thought that Max was acting strange after the banquet. He instructed her to send a banquet invitation to Juvelian under her name. Freya informed Max that it would be difficult to invite Juvelian right now. When Max, who looked annoyed, asked why, Freya explained that Juvelian was currently very popular. Meanwhile, Juvelian was surprised to receive so many invitation letters. She was curious why she was being invited to so many events. Feeling stressed about all the banquets, she planned to use her weak health as an excuse to refuse the invitations. Juvelian was then informed that there was an important invitation that she needed to reply to immediately. When she opened the letter, she was surprised to see that it was from the Hirn family, the family of the late Empress. The Hirn family usually sent letters to her father, but they had never sent one to Juvelian before. Juvelian began to worry that her father might be meeting with the crown prince at that very moment. She felt weak and didn't feel like answering any letters. She was even more annoyed because she couldn't come up with a plan to escape the supposed marriage. Juvelian was surprised by Max's sudden visit. He was standing outside her window. Juvelian was suspicious of Max because he always seemed to be able to get into her room through the window. Juvelian remembered her father telling Max that he would personally go to him and warn him never to visit the estate again. Juvelian then had an idea. She opened the window and clumsily tripped towards Max. As she fell into his arms, she asked him if he would like to go on a date. Max was surprised by Juvelian's sudden offer to go on a date. It had been a week since Max had been waiting for his teacher to leave Juvelian's home. Max was confused if Juvelian treated him so nicely because she liked him. He assumed that she did, and his thoughts spiraled out of control, even to the point of thinking about having children with her. Before Max could fantasize about his life together with Juvelian, she explained her situation to him so that there would be no misunderstandings. Max tried to hold back his laughter when she mentioned that they would be signing a dating contract. He thought it was funny because she was asking him to date her, but they needed a contract for it. Max was curious why Juvelian needed a contract if she wanted to date him. Juvilien had a hard time explaining the situation to Max, since he was supposedly a homeless mercenary and his time must be precious. She thought that he would agree to the contract if she promised him some benefits. Max was fuming at Juvilien. He thought that she was making a joke of him. When Juvilien mentioned that Max would only have to date her until she could independently get out of the Floyan mansion, Max was curious why she would go to such lengths to leave her home. Juvilien reminded him that her father had written a list of potential candidates for her to marry soon. When Max asked if Juvilien could decline the offer if she wanted to, she responded that she wanted to decline, but it was a person that she couldn't decline. Max asked the identity of the man Juvilien couldn't decline to. Before telling him the man's identity, Juvilien made Max promise to not tell a soul about it. When Juvilien told Max that it was the Crown Prince, he was shocked. He couldn't speak properly after finding out. Juvilien then mentioned that the Crown Prince would be the most likely choice, since they had the same nobility and status. Not only that, the Crown Prince was the heir of the great Magus Asht, the founder of the empire. Asht had solved every problem of his people by magic, and everyone revered his heir like a god. The reverence and fear the people gave to the Crown Prince was absolute. Juvilien couldn't decline the marriage when the other party was from the royal family. Declining the marriage meant that Juvilien and her family would be fighting against the empire. In order to get out of her marriage problem, Juvilien planned to show her father that she was now dating someone. After hearing her story, Max was curious why it sounded like Juvilien hated the Crown Prince so much. When Max told Juvilien that the Crown Prince may actually like and care for her, she was surprised. Max pointed out the benefits of marrying the Crown Prince. Aside from being the next in line to the throne, he could provide Juvilien with anything she needed. After thinking about it, Juvilien still wanted to run away from the marriage. Max was annoyed and left Juvilien's room when she mentioned that she did not want to be with the Crown Prince, who was a cold-hearted man. Before Juvilien could stop Max, he was already gone. In her room, Juvilien wondered if Max had answered yes or no to her offer. Returning to Salon Bloom's, Max was frustrated, which made Freya curious about his bad mood. When Freya asked if Max had a problem that he couldn't solve, he responded with another question, asking Freya the meaning behind a girl who wanted to avoid and run away from her potential marriage alliance. Freya was a little surprised that Max asked the question, thinking that he would absolutely know. She explained that the girl must have loathed the man extremely. Upon hearing Freya's words, Max couldn't stop thinking if Juvilien really loathed him. When Freya tried to guess the situation and mentioned that Max proposed to her but she instead wanted to run away, Max, who was startled, confessed that it wasn't him that proposed but instead it was Juvilien. Before Max could continue, he saw the curious eyes of Freya and immediately stopped before he regretted what he said. Max then diverted the topic and asked Freya if there was any news from the Emperor. Freya told Max that there was nothing new. His father still wanted him to come home and the Empress had sent assassins again to take Max's life. For the meantime, Freya had kept the assassin alive and asked Max what they should do with him. Since Max was a kid, his stepmother had always been trying to find a way to get rid of him. The incumbent Empress, Isabella Rusty Asht, had been behind the late Empress's death. Max observed that the Empress was starting to move again. Freya asked Max if they should behead the assassin immediately and send it to the Empress as a gift. But Max, who was filled with Juvilien's view of him, couldn't concentrate on their conversation. Freya was surprised to hear that Max ordered for the assassin's life to be spared. Freya had known Max for some time and knew that he was not one to let a threat to his life go unpunished. But because it was his order, Freya agreed to release the assassin. Max, who was somehow pleased with his decision, asked Freya if anyone had sent him a marriage proposal. Curious about Max's question, Freya was silent for a moment, then told Max that he had not received any marriage proposals and would have reported it to him immediately if he had. After hearing Freya's report, Max was a little disappointed and immediately left. At the Floyan mansion, Juvilien was again put in an awkward position, having dinner with her father. When the Duke called out Juvilien's name, her thoughts immediately went into panic, hoping that her father wouldn't talk about the marriage agreement. When the Duke asked for Juvilien's opinion about the Crown Prince, Juvilien turned pale and was nervous. Juvilien then hastily changed the topic by mentioning the founding history of their nation, the story of how the first emperor founded the nation. Juvilien then asked if the creations of the first emperor were still preserved to this day. The Duke was silent and showed a dark expression. He then immediately stood up and told Juvilien that he had urgent matters to attend to. Juvilien was surprised by the Duke's actions since he wasn't someone who would leave immediately after saying a few words. Outside of the mansion, the Duke wanted to endure but could no longer hold it in and had to leave. If Juvilien kept learning about the royal family, Even though not everything was recorded in the history books, if Juvilien found out just a little, she would be in huge trouble. The Duke assumed that the reason why Juvilien was learning about the royal family was because she had met Max. No matter how innocent Juvilien was, she had definitely heard rumors about the crown prince. The Duke could only wonder if Juvilien would accept Max. Clenching his hand, the Duke was surprised to hear Juvilien calling for him. When he asked the reason why she followed him, Juvilien responded that she was worried since he didn't look so well. But in reality, Juvilien ran after him because she wondered if the Duke acting strangely had anything to do with her. The Duke could only smile at the thought that Juvilien worried for him. He then covered Juvilien with his coat and asked her to get inside the mansion as it was very cold. When the Duke told Juvilien that she should learn more about the crown prince, Juvilien's whole body froze in fear. Juvilien already assumed the worst-case scenario that her father really wanted her to marry the crown prince. Even though she hated the idea of marrying the crown prince, Juvilien couldn't say no to her father's request and immediately went to bed. Inside her room, Juvilien was feeling uncomfortable because her stomach was hurting. She was then informed that there was another letter for her to read. The letter came from Rose Marie, who expressed her heartfelt gratitude for Juvilien's gift and for attending her banquet despite her poor health. Juvilien was touched by Rose Marie's letter as she could feel her affection. Juvilien had assumed that Rose Marie would be angry with her for leaving her party early, but instead she received a letter from her asking after Juvilien's well-being. Juvilien was surprised to see that the other side of the letter was an invitation to a tea party. Juvilien thought deeply about whether she should go to the tea party as she had been cooped up in her room for some time. Juvilien also thought that she could use the tea party as an opportunity to see if there were any rumors about the crown prince in the elite, such as what the crown prince hated the most. Meanwhile, Rose Marie and the other noble women were gathered together as Rose Marie shared the status of Juvilien's health. When Rose Marie mentioned that Juvilien would be joining them at their tea party, the other noble women couldn't hide their excitement, as they couldn't wait to see Juvilien again. Rose Marie then informed another noble lady named Veronica Joanna Thernst that the tea party would be held at her home. Veronica hesitated at first, knowing that Juvilien would be visiting her home, but eventually agreed to what Rose Marie had said. After their gathering, Veronica vented her frustrations with Rose Marie as she decided for herself that the tea party would be held in Veronica's room. The person who didn't want to listen to Veronica's frustrations was Mikhail. When Veronica mentioned that Juvilien would be coming to the party as well, Mikhail's attention immediately shifted. With his own ulterior motive, Mikhail charmed Veronica into inviting him to their tea party. With Mikhail's words and charm, Veronica fell for his words and agreed to let him join their tea party. Meanwhile, Mikhail was very pleased as he could finally meet Juvilien. At the arcade street, Juvilien wondered how grand the tea party would be and planned to pick out just the right outfit for the party. However, she was again escorted by many guards, which made her worry about whether she would be able to shop properly. While observing the wonderful dresses, Juvilien felt like they were all too fancy. Juvilien pondered this, as every shop she went to only had fancy dresses. Suddenly, Freya went up to Juvilien and told her that the clothes she was looking for wouldn't fit her. The guards were surprised when Freya easily approached Juvilien, while others shed a tear as Juvilien was finally being noticed. Juvilien thanked Freya for her advice. After choosing the items and dresses, Juvilien finally finished her shopping. Out of nowhere, trouble brewed in the middle of the street. When Juvilien observed the situation, she immediately recognized the person to be the shameless Baron that the Golden People talked about. When the mystery person spoke haughtily to the Baron, Juvilien was surprised. When she saw that it was her father's student, she was very shocked. When the Baron kept on insulting Max and asking for him to be arrested, Juvilien stepped in to stop the situation from escalating further. The Baron was surprised to see Juvilien in front of him. When she introduced herself to the crowd, the people around them began to gossip. The Baron immediately kneeled and greeted her respectfully. When Juvilien told him that she knew who he was, the Baron tried to use his cunning words to appease her, but she was only further annoyed. Baron Golden is known for trampling on those of lower status than him. Juvilien planned to teach him a lesson for being so obsequious to her. She announced, in the name of her father, Duke Regis, that no one would harm her man. Max's face turned red at the mention of being her man. Juvilien then whispered to Max that she had lied about him being her servant in order to save him. Max, however, misunderstood her and thought that she meant him as her lover. When Juvilien told the Baron that Max was the knight that her father had assigned to be her bodyguard, the Baron was shocked. Juvilien's real bodyguards were also confused by what she was saying. When Juvilien threatened the Baron for messing with her guard, Max was a little disappointed that she had not called him her lover. The Baron tried to reason that it was Max's fault for pushing a noble. However, the truth was that the Baron could not stand the fact that Max was more attractive than him, so he had used his status to bully him. Little did the Baron know that Max would retaliate and teach him a lesson. The Baron was insulted when Juvilien asked him to apologize to Max. Max, on the other hand, was curious if the issue could be resolved by simply giving the Baron money. Juvilien, who knew the hierarchy and standards of their country, apologized on behalf of her supposed guard. She also took responsibility for not properly educating him. Max then remembered Juvilien's request that he act like her lover in front of many people. Seeing him so quiet, Juvilien wondered if he was thinking. Suddenly, Max grabbed her hand and held it tightly, thanking her for saving him. The women around them were impressed by his charm and superb acting skills. Juvilien, on the other hand, was very confused by his sudden change of attitude. Max continued his act, explaining that he had been confused but was thankfully saved when Juvilien arrived. In front of everyone, he told Juvilien that he now wished to start their dating contract. Juvilien immediately covered Max's mouth, embarrassed that he had mentioned the contract in the middle of a crowded street. The people around them easily misunderstood their close posture and assumed that they were not in a normal relationship. Now embarrassed, Juvilien instructed Max to follow her quickly. After transferring to her carriage, Juvilien and Max had a more private conversation. Juvilien was surprised that Max had mentioned the contract in the street, since she thought he had rejected her offer by leaving without saying a word. She asked him why he had changed his mind. Max hadn't really changed his mind. The reason he hadn't answered Juvilien right away was because of what she had said about the Crown Prince, who was actually Max himself. Max's silence made Juvilien curious about what was going on in his head. She changed the topic by asking him why he had been at the arcade street, since she didn't think it was a place he would normally go shopping. Max, who was now irritated, aggressively responded that it didn't matter to her. He just liked to wander around the arcade street without a purpose. Juvilien clenched her fist as she tried to calm herself down and not be annoyed by his attitude. Max remembered the news that Freya had received. Juvilien was going to attend a tea party in the next few days, and so would Mikhail. He was curious why she was now attending a tea party. When Freya mentioned that it was still possible that Mikhail and Juvilien still had feelings for each other, Max immediately stopped his training and angrily left. Now furious, Max planned to stop Mikhail before he could do anything to Juvilien at the tea party. He knew that he couldn't keep showing up out of nowhere, so he planned to use the dating contract to be with Juvilien always and keep Mikhail away from her. Juvilien was now very curious about what was going on in Max's head, as he was now showing a dangerous expression. Before she could finish what she was about to say, she was cut off by Max, who wanted to ask her something first. He was curious why she had offered him the dating contract. Juvilien was nervous and responded that it was because he was her father's student, and the only person she could comfortably ask for something. Max's disappointed look after hearing the first reason immediately turned to happiness, and he couldn't stop smiling. Juvilien's answer was enough for him to agree to her offer. Meanwhile, Juvilien herself still saw Max's personality as questionable, but his face was still her type. When they were about to discuss the charging fee, Max immediately showed an annoyed look and told Juvilien that he wouldn't be charging her any fees. Instead, she could think of their contract as payment for taking care of his wounds before. Juvilien was very happy to know that Max would willingly cooperate with her. In return for his services, she would give him free accommodation. Max was embarrassed as Juvilien was now very close to him and asked him to let go of his hands. Juvilien informed him that he should no longer be worried about someone seeing them since they were now lovers. Max was very surprised. For him, this was no longer just a play. It now directly related to his life. Juvilien reminded Max that since they had started their contract, they must hold hands and stay close to each other, and Max must call her name passionately. Juvilien then remembered that they hadn't introduced themselves properly yet. She was about to introduce herself when Max cut her off again, telling her that he already knew her identity. Juvilien was surprised to hear that Max knew her identity for so long, but she was immediately annoyed when she realized that he wasn't properly addressing her, even though he knew her status. While avoiding eye contact, Max hid his full name from Juvilien and just told her that it was indeed Max. Juvilien's eyes sparkled as she looked at him. He had a meaningful name and would most likely become a great man. Max's happy expression changed immediately when Juvilien mentioned that they would now be writing down the contract. Max was hesitant about the contract idea, as he didn't see it as necessary since Juvilien wasn't going to be paying him. Juvilien was disappointed in him, as she thought her father would have taught him common knowledge. She then further explained the purpose of contracts. Juvilien was surprised when Max told her that she wouldn't take advantage of him. Juvelian's heart beat faster when she heard Max's words. However, she then explained that most frauds are committed by people we trust. She was surprised that Max knew nothing about the reality of life. Juvelian lectured Max, telling him that he should not trust someone completely just because they are close to you. When Max instantly agreed to what Juvelian said, she was doubtful if he really understood what she said. She eventually thought that she would teach him more common sense while they were still in the contract. Before they signed the contract, Juvelian went closer to Max's face and told him that they should seal the deal with their lips first. Max was caught off guard. Juvelian then mentioned that it was a very important step, while Max wondered if they were moving too fast. Max couldn't believe that his first kiss would end up being a contract agreement tool. As their faces were now close to one another, Juvelian whispered that Geraldine would be asking how they met, so they had to agree on their answers beforehand. Max, who was very embarrassed of misunderstanding Juvelian's words again, immediately composed himself and responded by agreeing with Juvelian. He said that they needed to discuss their answers beforehand. Because Max felt embarrassed, his face kept on turning red, which made Juvelian think that the place was too hot for him. Arriving at the Floyan mansion, Juvelian's guards were confused and asked for an explanation from her. After getting out of the carriage, Juvelian apologized to her guards and introduced Max as her lover. Geraldine and the other guards were surprised, as they had never seen Max's face before. They wondered if Juvelian had picked another man based solely on his looks. Juvelian explained that she had met her lover before at Count Magen's banquet. Geraldine paused and wondered if Count Magen was a noble. After observing Max, Geraldine assessed that even though he dressed like a mercenary, his aura was very elegant. To answer her guards' questions, Juvelian informed them that Max was not a noble, but rather just a mercenary. Her guards couldn't believe that Juvelian had picked a mercenary as her lover this time around. Geraldine asked Juvelian how a mercenary had a chance to get close to her. Max was annoyed that an ordinary knight was staring at him suspiciously. Max was always annoyed that no one knew his real identity, as only his subordinates and his teacher knew it. A few moments before getting out of the carriage, Max and Juvelian argued about who had saved the other. After being bested by Juvelian's reasoning, Max eventually agreed, as she was logically correct. Juvelian comforted him by telling him that it would only be tough at first and Max just needed to stand by her side and agree to what she says. Juvelian then answered Geraldine's question. With a serious look, she mentioned that she was the one who had saved him. Max was disappointed by their story, while Geraldine was confused immediately. Juvelian's guards talked to each other, as they had seen her save him at the arcade street. Some of them immediately thought that despite his looks, he was actually a pushover. Juvelian explained that she didn't hate Max back then. After meeting him again at Count Aurello's banquet and then again at the arcade street, she realized that he was her destiny, to which Max agreed by nodding his head. Geraldine was shocked by Juvelian's story. He had already assumed that she had picked Max just because of his face. Seeing their faces, Juvelian asked if they thought that Max was unworthy of her since he was just a commoner. She then acted tough and tried to strike dominance over her guards, when in fact they were observing Max, as he was the one showing the scariest face. Geraldine also assessed that Max's aura was not normal, but was somehow familiar. Juvelian then grabbed Max's arm and asked if he was alright since he was trembling. Max immediately calmed down and reassured Juvelian that he was now alright. Juvelian then told Max that he didn't need to worry, because she would protect him no matter what. The thought of being protected by Juvelian was very amusing and satisfying for Max. When the Duke saw Max and Juvelian together, he trembled in fear as Juvelian introduced Max as her lover. Max was very nervous about facing the Duke. He wanted to tell him the news right away, but the Duke was filled with anger. Before Max could say his greetings, Duke Regis asked Juvelian what was going on. While the Duke was angrily staring at her, Juvelian was surprised by her father's actions. He had never cared before, no matter how badly she had messed up. Juvelian then assumed that her father was furious because she had not picked the man he wanted for her. Thinking that everything would be okay since she had chosen his student, who he was content with, Juvelian explained to her father that she and Max were now officially dating. Hearing the news, Duke Regis' expression darkened. He asked himself why they had ended up in such a situation. The Duke was cautious in order to prevent Max from getting closer to his daughter. At the reception room, the Duke was irritated by Max's courteous behavior towards Juvelian. He thought that Max was seducing his daughter. Duke Regis already had his suspicions that Max was scheming something. He remembered how brutal Max had been with traitors, and how he always made an example of them. Duke Regis suspected that Max would just use Juvelian as another tool to help him conspire more quickly. During the meal, Duke Regis asked them both how they had met. Juvilien was nervous, knowing that the questions would keep coming. Even though Geraldine and the other guards believed her, the Duke would not fall for it so easily. Juvilien planned to mix the truth with lies in order to deceive him completely. Juvilien explained that Max had come looking for the Duke one day, but he was not home. With nowhere else to go, Max had visited Juvilien instead. When the Duke heard that Juvilien had let Max stay in her room for the time being, he immediately thought of the worst-case scenario. The Duke could not stop shaking, assuming that his daughter and Max had been sleeping together. When Juvilien mentioned that nothing had happened between them, Max nodded in agreement. The Duke, on the other hand, wanted to believe their words, but he was already filled with anger towards Max. He swore that if Max touched one hair on Juvilien's head, he would meet the Duke's wrath. The Duke was planning to not let Max leave the mansion alive. He tried to contain his anger as he asked Juvilien why they didn't tell Derek about Max's arrival. Juvilien explained that it was already late at night and she didn't want to bother anyone. She also said that she answered the guards' questions vaguely. Juvilien also pointed out that she was sure that Max would not harm her. Clenching his fist, Duke Regis knew Max's true nature. He was the most dangerous man in the world, and no matter how many times the Duke had told Max to change his terrible personality, he would still become a barbaric tyrant. If the Duke's judgment was correct, then Max would most likely endanger his daughter in the process of becoming a tyrant. Staring at Juvilien, Duke Regis could only wonder what if Max threatened her life. Duke Regis was disappointed in himself for having accepted Max as his student. Juvilien confessed her supposed feelings, saying that she had a crush on Max the first time she laid eyes on him. She felt like it was a miracle that the one she loved also loved her back. Juvilien understood that her father might not trust her anymore because of her self-indulgent lifestyle. However, she swore that she would never ruin his reputation and asked that he consent to their relationship. Duke Regis was surprised to hear those words from Juvilien. From his perspective, Juvilien had never ruined his reputation. She was the daughter he loved and adored the most in the world. Duke Regis would give anything for Juvilien. However, he informed them that he did not allow Juvilien to date Max and asked them to break up immediately. Juvilien was shocked when the Duke told them to break up, as her plan had not worked out. She immediately assumed that the Duke wanted her to marry the Crown Prince and make the political marriage work. Juvilien understood that the Duke would never see her change instantly, and would benefit more if he used her for political reasons. With no more moves to pull, Juvilien was speechless. Max then held Juvilien's hand tightly and told the Duke that they would not be breaking up. The Duke and Juvilien were surprised by what Max said. Max reminded the Duke of his teachings. He said, "Swordsmanship is to protect things we treasure. You become stronger to protect your weakness. One day, I will also meet someone that I will do my utmost to protect. That person is my weakness." He wrapped his arm around Juvilien and told the Duke that he had finally found the person that he wanted to protect. Meanwhile, Juvilien was confused by Max's sudden change in behavior. She thought that he was more of a practical person than a garrulous man. Before Max could finish his speech, Duke Regis told him to stop and not to speak such nonsense in front of him. In reality, the Duke was still offended by Max's previous remark, calling his daughter a brat. But now, Max was acting as if Juvilien was a precious thing to him. Max had enough. He told the Duke that if he kept opposing them without a legitimate reason, he would no longer hold back. He no longer cared if the Duke was his teacher or not. The Duke was now furious and immediately responded that he would also no longer regard Max as his disciple. Juvilien was confused and surprised by how quickly things had escalated. She only wanted to use the dating contract with Max as a way to get out of the marriage setup. However, it had ended up with her father disowning his own disciple. Max had no problem whatsoever if he was no longer regarded as the Duke's disciple. He immediately grabbed Juvilien's hand and wanted to leave the mansion. Fuming with anger, Duke Regis grabbed Max's shoulder and told him to stop. Juvilien did not expect that her plan would end up in a fight between her father and his disciple. Realizing that things had gone too far, as Max was now clearly looking down on her father, she asked her father to calm down first and told him that she would handle it. Seeing his daughter's face, Duke Regis let go of Max's shoulder and let Juvilien settle the issue by herself. As they were walking away from the Duke, Juvilien told Max that she had something important to say to him and asked him to wait. Juvilien thanked Max for speaking on her behalf, but when Max addressed her father with such disrespect, it crossed the line for her. Max was taken aback by Juvilien's words, as he had only intended to assist her. Juvilien then reminded Max of what she detested the most. Perplexed, Max inquired about it. Juvilien told Max that his actions didn't improve the situation. She never intended for him to be kicked out or to disrespect her father. Coercing someone to comply with their wishes didn't constitute assistance. Instead, it led to Max doing as he pleased. Upon hearing her words, Max questioned whether Juvilien still required his aid. Juvilien grasped Max's hand and conveyed that she did need help, but his behavior during their meal had been excessively extreme. Consequently, Juvilien sought an alternative approach. Max inquired about his next steps, and Juvilien responded that he needed to mend the relationship and reconcile with her father. Max felt irritated at the notion of reconciling with his instructor, yet Juvilien tried to persuade him that for reconciliation to occur, one party must initiate an apology. When Max resisted, he hesitated while gazing at Juvilien. Juvilien deduced that Max likely struggled with being the first to apologize due to his significant ego. Recognizing that this was a problem Juvilien needed to address herself, Max ultimately consented to apologizing to the Duke first. Observing Max and Juvilien, Duke Regis was astonished that Max had listened to someone, especially to Juvilien. He contemplated whether Max had genuinely changed. After a while, Max and Juvilien returned. Juvilien informed her father that Max had something to convey. Aware that Max's transformation wouldn't come easily, as he had observed Max's growth over the past decade, Duke Regis hesitated when Max offered a sincere apology to his teacher. The Duke recalled that just a few months prior, Max had stated that vulnerability was unnecessary. Duke Regis remained skeptical of Max's apologies and believed he was exploiting his daughter. The Duke decided he wouldn't merely stand by and watch any longer. When the Duke expressed that he had no memory of having a disciple, Max promptly comprehended from the Duke's expression that the Duke had never intended for Juvilien to be paired with Max. Although Max realized Juvilien had misconstrued her father's intentions, he had no intention of rectifying the misunderstanding for the Duke. Seeing both her father and Max, Juvilien understood that reconciliation was improbable. Left with no recourse other than an extreme solution, Juvilien knelt before her father, apologized, and accepted the blame. When Juvilien apologized for her father, the Duke and Max were both startled. Juvilien understood that she had to take the blame for announcing that she was now dating, so she needed to come up with a strategy to move forward. Seeing Juvilien kneeling, Max immediately told her that it was his duty to apologize and begged her to stand up so he could apologize to the Duke. Juvilien was surprised at first, but she was confused as to why Max was freaking out. She assumed that he didn't know how scary her father could be when he was angry, which was why she had to prostrate herself to beg for forgiveness. The Duke immediately accepted Juvilien's apology, as she had been firm in her refusal to stand up until he did. Juvilien was again surprised by her father's behavior, which was different from how she remembered him. Both the Duke and Max were becoming restless as the ground that Juvilien was kneeling on was cold. Juvilien, on the other hand, was confused as to why the teacher and disciple were now getting along so well after their heated argument. Still unsure of whether her father would accept her apology, Juvilien took responsibility for Max's discourtesy and asked him to forgive Max as well. When the Duke instantly forgave Max, Juvilien was surprised that it was so easy. The Duke and Max were still begging her to stand up, and they were at the point of having to drag her to her feet. After they had all returned to their seats, the Duke told them that even though he had forgiven Max's discourtesy, he still did not want them to date. Juvilien responded that she did not expect him to immediately accept their decision, but for the time being, she just wanted him to look after Max again. Duke Regis would not easily let Max be with Juvilien, no matter how much she begged. However, he also did not want his child to get hurt. After all, he would do whatever it took for her. Glaring at Max, Duke Regis knew that he could reveal the truth with a little nudge. If the Duke slowly revealed the truth about Max, it was likely that Juvilien and Max would break up. Both were surprised and unsure when the Duke finally agreed to their relationship. Juvilien was overjoyed to hear her father accepting her decision. Behind his decision, Duke Regis wanted to apologize to Juvilien as he would now be putting Max on a difficult path. Inside Juvilien's room, she was very pleased to see all of the sweets that had been placed there. She was very satisfied and slightly enjoyed how she had gotten permission from her cold-blooded father. Juvilien was already celebrating in her mind, while in reality, she and Max were having an elegant dinner. Now that she had her father's permission, she wanted to directly tackle the terms of their dating contract. When she asked Max if he had any conditions he would like to request, Max was silent while drinking tea. This made Juvilien curious and assumed that Max was a runaway noble. After tasting the tea, Max was dissatisfied and wondered how they could call the drink tea. Juvelian's noble image of Max immediately shattered as she assumed that Max didn't know how to taste tea. After drinking their tea, Max and Juvelian went ahead and wrote the terms of their dating contract. When Juvelian saw the terms that Max wrote, she held back her laughter as she believed that Max only agreed to make the contract so that she wouldn't meet with other men. Juvelian became even more confused when Max pointed out another term, which was that he could call her by her first name. Juvelian was a bit embarrassed that someone would be calling her by her first name, but eventually agreed to the terms. Hearing that Juvelian agreed, Max's face turned red and his personality changed to a more gentle manner. After reading what they had written, Juvelian was confused about what to fix first and planned to start with the grammar that needed correcting in the contract. Juvelian was very exhausted after fixing their contract and asked Max to read it and check if there was anything that needed changing. After reading the contract, Max couldn't accept what was written and tore it apart. Juvelian was disheartened that Max had easily ripped up the contract that she had worked so hard on. Juvelian then realized that Max had always treated her in this way and never cared about her feelings. He would vanish from her room after she took care of him and disappear as he pleased without saying a single word. Because of the contract they had made, Juvelian would always see Max often. Juvelian only hoped not to be treated badly anymore and immediately ended their contract. Max was bewildered by what Juvelian had said. He didn't want the contract to end, as they had worked so hard to get permission to date. He reminded Juvelian of how she hated the crown prince and would never marry him, but she was just silent and angry. Juvelian explained that their arrangement would never work out because they were never a match in the first place. Continuing their dating contract would only exhaust them both. Max reasoned that it was just a heat-of-the-moment assumption. However, Juvelian was sure that it was not, and she didn't want to sign the contract with Max's nasty attitude. Max was caught off guard. When he was younger, he always tore up the reports that he received from his subordinates. It had become a habit of his to tear apart documents. That was Max's working style since he was young. Since no one had ever criticized him for tearing up papers, Max didn't care about others' efforts and assumed that they could just rewrite them. Juvelian tried to make a point to Max that he would be happy if someone disregarded his own opinion. Max understood what Juvelian was implying and asked if she was displeased by his response. Growing tired, Juvelian responded that she was indeed almost fed up with it. Max was confused and displeased by Juvelian's arrangement, and he didn't really want to comply with her requests. Juvelian gave Max an ultimatum. If the agreement was too hard for him, he could go ahead and cancel it since she was the one who had asked for his help in the first place. Max assessed the situation and knew that Juvelian was speaking her mind. If he agreed to cancel the contract now, there was a big chance that he would never see Juvelian again. Max tried his best to remain calm, but when he saw Juvelian, he immediately apologized for his actions. Later that night, Max became more obedient to Juvelian and ended up signing the new contract that was made. Juvelian was surprised by the sudden change and baffled by how easily Max apologized and became obedient. After finishing the contract, Max felt like he had been led around by the nose. With enthusiasm, Juvelian asked if they should announce their relationship. With an upcoming tea party at Count Terrence's mansion, Juvelian told Max that they would be attending the party. With a serious demeanor, Max asked Juvelian who would be attending the party. Juvelian naively answered that only Rosemary and her friends would be attending. Max immediately suspected that Juvelian didn't know that Mikhail would be attending the party as well. Aside from Lady Terrence, no other noble lady knew that Mikhail would be attending. Max then agreed to go to the tea party with Juvelian. Max's plan was to trample Mikhail and crush his face with his feet. After the night had passed and the day of the party arrived, Rosemary and the other noble ladies were surprised to see Mikhail together with Veronica at the Terrence mansion. When Rosemary asked Veronica for an explanation, she responded that she was only following the principle of the meeting. The host has the right to freely invite whoever they want to the party. Rosemary tried to explain that the other members of the party must approve of the person first. However, Mikhail was good at twisting words and was able to immediately gain an ally in Rosemary's circle of friends. The noble ladies were now blushing because they would be having more than one uninvited guest at the party. Mikhail faintly smiled and thanked the other noble ladies for supporting his presence. After being charmed by Mikhail, all the noble ladies were now flocking around him. Meanwhile, Rosemary knew that Juvelian would likely feel bad if she saw Mikhail at the party. All of a sudden, the doors to the mansion opened and the topic of the moment was Juvelian. They were all surprised that Juvelian came with another uninvited guest. Seeing Juvelian with another man, Mikhail trembled and was curious about Max's identity. Rosemary immediately greeted Juvelian and asked who she was with. When Juvilien announced that she was with her lover, Max, the noble ladies were already swooned by his handsome face. Max was very pleased when the noble ladies said out loud that Max and Juvilien were a beautiful couple. Seeing Max's expression, Juvilien was impressed and promised to reward him later. As Juvilien and Rosemary exchanged greetings, Juvilien was surprised to see Mikhail at the party as well. Both Max and Mikhail immediately locked eyes, showing annoyed expressions. The noble ladies were extremely excited to witness Juvilien's current lover and her ex. Mikhail, who was now warped in his own delusion, thought that Juvilien had left him for her new lover. However, Mikhail was still forcing himself to believe that it was still Juvilien's plan to get his attention. Noticing that Juvilien only said his name, Mikhail instantly assumed that Max must be her servant or just a commoner. Thinking that she was provoking him, Mikhail's patience had reached its limits. He then greeted Juvilien, hiding his grudge against her. Meanwhile, Juvilien was suspicious of Mikhail's actions, as they never had a relationship where they could smile at each other. Juvilien used to fall for Mikhail's smile and chased after him until death. But now, she didn't want to bother even joking with him. Max was a little pleased when Juvilien nonchalantly responded to Mikhail. Juvilien thanked Max for escorting her to the party, but was surprised when he hugged her all of a sudden. Max's plan worked, as Mikhail was very angry at both Juvilien and him, knowing that the one standing beside Juvilien was no longer him, but Max instead. With Max's action, Juvilien was curious if he was nervous since his face did not look well. Rosemary then gave a suggestion, since there was already one uninvited guest at their tea party, adding another one shouldn't be a problem. The noble ladies instantly agreed to her suggestion, which made Juvilien worry, as Max's actions were always unpredictable. Mikhail used his charm to seduce Veronica into going out with him. However, he didn't care about any of those things, and his only focus was Juvilien and how she would react to him conversing passionately with Veronica. In the past, Juvilien would never let other girls come near Mikhail. Now that she had Mikhail going on a date with Veronica, she would surely not let it pass. However, to Mikhail's expectations, they were only ignored, as Juvilien was quite busy talking with Rosemary. Mikhail was annoyed that Juvilien was no longer looking at him. Rosemary then came up with an idea and wanted to invite Juvilien to their tasting event. Juvilien was startled at the news of being invited to a testing event. Mikhail was still fixated that Juvilien would rather direct her attention towards Rosemary and the other noble women and not him. Juvilien was confused on what she needed to do, and when she was about to politely refuse the offer, Veronica immediately refused the idea and did not agree with it. Veronica then mentioned that they have rules and regulations before someone could join the event. They couldn't just add anyone without the proper procedures. This was then agreed upon by the other members of the party. When Juvilien humbly understood the other members' opinion, she was surprised to see Max watching over her from a branch. Juvilien was worried that someone might see Max on a tree. Mikhail immediately noticed that Juvilien was acting strangely and kept looking at the window. When he diverted his eyes to the window, Mikhail was surprised to see Max above on a tree. Juvilien could barely focus on their conversations, while Mikhail was curious why Max was outside and staring at Juvilien. Seeing that Mikhail was looking at him, Max taunted him, which annoyed Mikhail to the point that he needed to excuse himself to get some fresh air. When Veronica offered to join him, Mikhail avoided her hand and told her that it was okay and that he would be right back. Veronica was hurt with how Mikhail reacted, while Mikhail's head was filled with rage and wanted to kill Max. Meanwhile, Juvilien was already exhausted thinking about her father's reaction if he finds out that Max is acting weird and would immediately make her marry the crown prince. Getting worried if she would be caught, Juvilien noticed that Max was no longer on top of the tree. Juvilien was so out of focus that she no longer knew why the other noble women were excited to see Juvilien's car. When Juvilien asked Rosemary what she meant, she explained that the tea party is using a special car as the condition. Juvilien was panicking as she missed out so much of their conversation because she was so busy looking at Max, who had now just vanished. Headed outside, Mikhail grabbed a sword and went looking for Max, but to his surprise, Max was already waiting for him. Engaged in the act of washing her hands, Juvilien found herself momentarily lost in thought. The notion of hosting a tea party had taken her by surprise, and she experienced a minor startle when Veronica's voice pulled her back to reality, questioning whether she had an issue with her. Juvilien had been observing Veronica throughout the entire party, and with a sigh, she recognized that her emotions had inadvertently been laid bare through her expressions. In a candid admission, Juvilien disclosed her frustration with Mikhail. She acknowledged how he had manipulated her trust, lamenting her own naivety in accepting his affections as genuine. This revelation left Veronica visibly agitated. her voice trembling as she asked whether Juvilien believed Mikhail was similarly using her. Juvilien comprehended Veronica's reluctance to confront the truth, empathizing due to her own past experiences. Expressing regret, Juvilien offered an apology to Veronica for causing her discomfort, and assured her that harm was never her intention. As she prepared to depart, Juvilien informed Veronica that she intended to uphold her commitment to the tea party. However, she made it clear that if attending was not in Veronica's best interest, she respected that choice as well. Meanwhile, a palpable tension simmered between Max and Mikhail, their gazes laden with menace and foreboding. In a menacing tone, Mikhail issued a threat to Max, vowing not to allow him to escape unscathed. Pinning the blame for his anger on Max, Mikhail lunged hastily, aiming an attack. Yet, Max had preemptively deduced Mikhail's strategy, swiftly countering by delivering a forceful knee strike to his abdomen. Caught off guard by Max's unexpected strength, Mikhail found himself kneeling involuntarily. Max taunted Mikhail, casting aspersions on his abilities and suggesting that crawling suited him better. Inquisitive, Mikhail pressed Max for his identity and his relationship to Juvilien. Max retorted that such matters were not Mikhail's concern, adding an element of mockery to his response. Rage propelling him forward, Mikhail drew his sword, its blade hovering near Max's neck. Yet, before he could articulate his next words, Max interjected, reminding him of Juvilien's previously given answer to that very question. Further provoking Mikhail, Max slyly suggested that he was, in fact, Juvilien's cherished lover. Mikhail, now filled with anger, didn't believe what Max told him because he believed that Juvilien would never love a commoner like him. Out of nowhere, Juvilien called out to Mikhail and told him to put his sword down immediately. Mikhail was startled by Juvilien's voice, while Max regretted that he hadn't beaten Mikhail more before Juvilien could find out. Juvilien asked Mikhail if he had disregarded her words and firmly told him again to put his weapon down. When Mikhail mentioned Juvilien's first name, she immediately told him to call her Lady Floyan and not Juvilien, and reminded him to pay attention to his manners. Before Mikhail could finish his question, Juvilien cut him off by asking what he was doing, raising his sword at someone's lover. When Mikhail tried to explain to Juvilien, he habitually called Juvilien by her first name, which prompted Max to remind him again to address Juvilien as Lady Floyan. Mikhail was about to fully pull his sword out as he had had enough of Max's interruptions when Juvilien asked Mikhail how he could pull out his sword so easily, and that if the Duke would hear about it, he would most likely be disappointed. Before Mikhail could finish his sentence, Juvilien immediately tended to Max's care, asking if he was all right. After conversing for a few moments, both Juvilien and Max were about to leave when Mikhail suddenly grabbed Juvilien's wrist and asked for them to have a moment alone. Max was immediately enraged by Mikhail's action and threatened him that if he didn't let go of Juvilien, he would be disabled. Juvilien then calmly asked Max to stop. However, Max had no plans on stopping, but was eventually persuaded by Juvilien to pull himself together. Juvilien then asked Max to wait for her as she would have to speak with Mikhail for a moment. Mikhail was very happy that Juvilien was now about to speak with him, and assumed that Max was the delusional one for thinking that Juvilien and he were really lovers. When Mikhail held Juvilien's hand and told her that they would be going somewhere private, he was surprised when Juvilien menacingly warned him to let go of her hand as he had no right to touch a lady without her permission. Mikhail was confused while being told by Juvilien again to let go. Mikhail trembled as he didn't expect Juvilien to talk to him with such authority before. Juvilien used to treat Mikhail equally as her when he was truly of a lower class. Mikhail flinched when Juvilien kept on repeating to let go of her hand. Mikhail finally released his grip, and Juvilien then lectured him that using force on other people's bodies without permission is a form of violence. She then reminded him that he needed to pay more attention to his actions and not to repeat such an action again, not only to Juvilien but to anyone else as well. After speaking her mind, Juvilien immediately went towards Max, telling him that it was now settled. Max was still unsure if her business with him was finished and wanted to confront Mikhail to resolve the issue. Mikhail suddenly cried out, asking why Juvilien chose Max and not him. He asked what Juvilien's purpose was in coming to the party and ignoring him. Mikhail's delusion got the best of him, and he accused Juvilien of choosing Max over him to get his attention. Juvilien was confused by what Mikhail was talking about. She was annoyed and curious as to why she would need to do all of the things that Mikhail was accusing her of just to get his attention. She was curious if Mikhail still thought that she was the same girl who had been in a one-sided relationship with him for 2 years. Juvilien told Mikhail face to face that she no longer cared for him. Mikhail did not want to believe it, as Juvilien had told him before that she loved him. Juvilien told Mikhail that she had told him that before, but now she felt differently about him. As they were leaving, Juvilien instructed Max not to speak to Mikhail, as she did not want to get involved with him in the slightest. The noble women hastily left the area as they felt the tension around Mikhail. Mikhail trembled as he could not process what Juvilien had said, telling him that she no longer loved him and did not want to get involved with him. Mikhail clenched his fists as he would never accept the truth. Meanwhile, Veronica, who was his supposed date, was concerned for his well-being. When Veronica held onto Mikhail's arm, he yanked it away and told her not to cling onto him. Mikhail's action resulted in Veronica being thrown to the ground. As she trembled, Veronica could not believe that Mikhail was capable of treating her like that. She then remembered what Juvilien had told her and finally realized how Juvilien had been treated before. Mikhail, who was now fully absorbed in his delusion, planned to disturb Juvilien even more as he did not want to end their relationship so easily. He walked away from the area, leaving Veronica on the ground crying. Later that day, while Juvilien and Max were headed home, Max asked why Juvilien kept staring at him. Juvilien responded that she had something to say to him. Even though Max had been able to get away safely, he had still climbed the tree and confronted Mikhail, which made Juvilien worry as he was so reckless and impulsive. Will Juvilien ever find out Max's true identity? Find out next time.